And don't worry, welcome back to Speaking from Ignorance, where we were talking about brownfield sites and the housing issues in the UK. What an interesting topic.
Throwback
for this
to
week.
episode 2.
Wow.
We're joined today by Luke Gent.
Hello, I'm Luke.
Hi, I'm Daniel, student studying astrophysics.
Hi, I am Jack. I'm a professional development coach, a social mobility advocate, and a charity sector worker.
Hi guys, I'm Sid. I'm an astrophysics PhD student in Heidelberg, Germany.
Hello, I am Don Basilio, a singing teacher, a member of the clergy, also a fictional character, from Rossini's Barbiere di Sevilla, based on the French play by de Beaumarchais. And now, time for our guest to introduce himself. Luke.
Hello, I'm Luke Gent. I'm currently a research assistant in the area of forensic science and anthropology at Bournemouth University.
That's really interesting. We should just have you on every week and get rid of these physicists.
Oh, okay.
Why do you guys need two astrophysics students? Does that guy in Germany even speak English? I thought this was a UK podcast.
Brexit means Brexit.
Brexit.
Okay, and if I'm understanding you, Luke, you're an archaeologist by trade. So how's that mesh with the sort of
Forensic anthropologist.
Yeah, I'm very picky about what I wanted to do. My undergraduate degree essentially is archaeological and forensic sciences, which, to be fair, half the people do realise they do stick together very well, but half people, usually when they try and think of archaeology, think of Time Team, and they think of forensic science, think of, like, I don't know, NCIS or CSI, and they go, how do they go both together? Well, they're both reconstructive investigative sciences, just with slightly different time periods and slightly different contexts. Like, a lot of the techniques that are used for both sciences are very similar, if not the same. So I found this fascinating, found this interesting. So hence why I did the undergraduate degree I wanted to. So yeah, by trade, part archaeologist, part forensic researcher.
To be honest, that makes sense, because I've been reading a book recently about the history of paleontology, and it's like they were saying that anatomists and forensic scientists and things have actually been far more successful in the history of paleontology at constructing accurate hominid skeletons and actually finding. And geologists have been much better at finding them. So you just go, paleontologists, up your game.
That's the beauty of the subject area I'm in, actually, because the research area I've been in for the past few years, I'm always fascinated by, even though I've taken a quick stop break with this research assistant position, is forensic taphonomy. And taphonomy is amazing because it spreads into so many different fields, for example. Like, spreads anything from paleontology, which is where it originated, to geology, archaeology, and forensic science as well. It's a multidisciplinary subject, which is why I love it. Again, it shows how picky I am as a person and how bored I can get. So it's nice because I get to know a lot, and I get to know a little about a lot of things, if that makes sense.
You get to be a sort of Renaissance man.
I'd hope to be. However, obviously, it makes things so much more difficult.
That is the dream.
That's the dream. It makes things so much more difficult.
That sounds really, really cool, Luke. So how long have you been doing this research assistant role?
The research assistant role has been since last December, because I essentially applied to start a PhD, and what happened was, even though I got the project, I got the position, the funding is just general studentship competitive funding, and I was competing against other people, and they said, even though you didn't get the funding this year, you got the project, so we're going to roll it over to next year. So it's going to start at the end of 2020 instead. And I finished my masters, and I was quite literally working in a private school as a lab technician for maybe a week before I heard about this research assistant position, which one of my old colleagues, told me about. And it's forensic toxicology. And the thing is, I don't have a lot of experience with toxicology, but he told me, why not try and apply for widen your experience. At first I was like, oh no, I'm not going to. I was like, there's no way I can do this. But he was like, to be fair, you like doing different things anyway. So I was like, fine, I'll apply to it. And obviously several months later, I'm doing the position somehow. So it's been a bit of a whirlwind. It ends this December. So the whole point is I'm quite lucky in the sense where it was a 1-year project, which is what I wanted to do. It gains me further experience, gets me involved in a slightly new field that I've not had much experience in before. And it means I can do something useful before I start my PhD at the end of this year.
having not really done toxicology before, has it been a very, very steep learning curve for you?
Oh wow, definitely. Like what's the word? One of the things I didn't mention at the interview was when they're because obviously the people they interviewed. This was at the university I did my masters at and undergraduate at, so they could see obviously what classes I did, and they could if they without any further effort, they could probably figure out I avoided the toxicology units. Not necessarily because I didn't want to do them. It's just more because there was just other things I felt more interested. I was more interested in anatomy, taphonomy, the decomposition process, as opposed to toxicology, because that's more of an analytical chemistry point of view. But the PhD I want to do is a mixture of forensic taphonomy, decomposition essentially, and toxicology. So this research assistant position I thought was the perfect opportunity for me to get involved in this area. And yes, there's been quite a steep learning curve, but my supervisor knew that, and he's been really helpful in getting me on board, getting me up to speed, really.
Can you, for the benefit of me and potentially some of our other viewers, define some of the terms that
yes,
you'll be
apologies.
using? So, like, for example, forensic taphonomy, toxicology, just like general layman's definition.
Sure, I'll just give you them in the context I know. So, like, so basically, taphonomy, the way I know it is, in regards to forensic science, is essentially it's the study of human and animal remains, how they decompose, and how it interacts with the surrounding environment, and how that environment interacts with the decomposition process, or how they degrade, how they become rotten, let's say, with them as well. So we essentially study those processes, and we have to try and apply them to a criminal investigation to try and make it useful, or to be official, medico-legal application. So just, again, fancy for criminal investigations, essentially. Toxicology, quite simply, I know definitely some analytical chemist friends who will think I'm butchering it, but again, I'm trying to speak in layman's terms. Essentially, it's more determining drug use and the potential toxicity of certain substances and seeing how they can further a legal investigation, essentially. So you're more or less investigating how a drug works, if it's toxic, and does it pose any threat really to like human life or any other life, really.
Okay, thanks.
No worries.
So your main goal is like forensic taphonomy, and your PhD is a mix of that and toxicology. What's your actual PhD topic? Do you know yet, or did you just apply into the field?
I know the brief outlines of it, and essentially the specific niche field it is forensic proteomics. And to be very simple, forensic proteomics is the study of the proteome. The proteome, quite simply put in layman terms, is just the entire complement of proteins that's expressed by an organism, more or less. So basically, the amount of proteins that's expressed within a human or animal or plant organism, let's just say. And we're studying proteins, more or less, and how they can be applied in the world of forensics. It's very niche. It's very much it's like my area of forensic taphonomy, so the study of decomposition. It's like my previous research, because I previously researched more from let's just say a macro scale, where I looked at trauma on skeletal remains. Bony remains, let's just say, and I looked at how that changed over time. We're essentially going to be looking at the same thing, but we're going to be looking at how proteins, lipids, and metabolites in the body, so again, molecular biomolecules, and see how they change over time, and see how we can apply it in forensics. So it's going to be forensic proteomics is a relatively new topic. Like proteomics forensics isn't so much, but the molding of the two is. There's been a lot of only recent work done, let's just say in the past 15 years, 20 years. Obviously, there has been more prior to that, but it's very much a fresh take, which is what I'm very excited to be a part of. But also the scary thing about doing something like this is there's not a lot to work on already. So
It's exciting.
It's very exciting. I'm very happy.
Frontiers of research.
I'm very excited to be part of it. Like when I read about the project happening, because I first met her. The supervisor at a conference I went to 2 years ago, and this was part of her PhD work, and then she became a professor, and then she was advertised for a position. So when I heard she was advertising a PhD project in something that she was doing previously, which was forensic proteomics, I don't want to be cheesy to say it's definitely cool to me, but I knew I wanted to do forensic taphonomy still, but I knew I wanted to make a greater impact. I knew I wanted to make a great impact. At least I knew I wanted to do something slightly new in it, and when I saw this project, I applied for it immediately because I thought this is something I really definitely be passionate about. It could really help if it works out. Again, if it works out, which hopefully it will. So, do you want me to tell you a little bit more about what the aim is with it?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, so basically, in regards to forensic investigation, how a lot of forensic anthropologists or archaeologists get involved is they mainly get brought in, let's just say, when remains are beyond a certain point of decomposition. Because obviously, have you guys ever heard of, I don't know if you guys ever watched, I mean, this is not a good baseline to ask, if you guys ever watch CSI shows, because they get a majority of it wrong, but I'll ask anyways. Have you ever watched any of these
seen
CSI
bits and
shows
pieces,
and heard of something called PMI or post-mortem interval? Maybe. I can't imagine they would have brought up because they're not accurate. But no, that's okay. That's okay. Post-mortem interval, you essentially look in the window between death and when the body's discovered. And obviously a lot of, and like anthropologists and archaeologists often get brought into it when the body is either decomposed beyond recognition or decomposed beyond a point where their skills are more useful, for example, because they have a certain skill set where they're able to identify age, sex, or biological information from even just skeletal remains that a lot of pure forensic scientists have not been trained to do. So a main issue that's involved is, for example, there's been plenty of research to determine how long someone has been deceased for. If they've only been with, let's just say, deceased for anything from 1 hour to 36. There's been a lot of research regarding that, and it's very technical and involves a lot of biological, anything from detecting the temperature to look at again the moisture content. Basically, there's a ton of factors to look at. However, when they find skeletonized remains, they still look at how it looks. For example, it's something very simple with morphology. They look at how, let's just say, degraded it looks. The trouble is, that's very subjective, and it may not be entirely accurate. So, for example, if you find skeletonized remains, you may not be sure whether they've been decomposed like that for anything between 6 months to several years, because it depends on the environment. It depends whether it's been high humidity, high heat, tropical environment, or if it's been extremely cold. It's been very preservative. So hence why people in my field try and get brought into it. But again, one of the main issues they have right now is they're still kind of old school about how they identify remains as skeletonized. So this project we're planning on doing, which is part of what she's done, definitely a lot of part of what she's done before, is try and look at something more reliable. And so we're going to try and look at it from a molecular scale, rather than look at it from how it looks, to try and see if we can see if the proteins degrade in a pattern. And if we can apply that to try and actually say, okay, even though they've been skeletonized for however many time, we might be able to pin it down to within a month or a couple of months, which is better than being off by a year. Like if they've been, let's just say, if the remains have been there for like 10 years, and it's definitely a cold case, let's just say, it's going to be very difficult to determine with good accuracy how long they've been decomposed for. And that, again, this is a criminal investigation. It doesn't help. It doesn't help if you're off by hours. So the whole point of it is to trying to improve the investigation side of things from cases that might not have a lot of hope, if that makes sense.
How good is the current accuracy for those criminal investigations? I assume it varies based on the timescale, but let's you pick one and then you compare just how good are the current methods and what's your sort of baseline for improvement.
The trouble is, there's a lot of debate in regards to the world of forensic science, and we constantly have to deal with people arguing about this. From my personal opinion, I think the current methods we have so far if they're only within the first few stages of decomposition. So basically, let's just say up to the body's bloating, there's still flesh on, and it's not fully skeletonized. Not at the dry decay stage. They can be extremely accurate, because what they can do, especially if you bring in specialists, you can bring in specialists who know, let's just say, a lot about the environment. And there's been a lot of, again, that's what taxonomy research is about. A lot what these body farms are used for. Like, they use current knowledge about how environment works to allow that to increase the accuracy of your method. So I think in regards to whilst the body, to be very layman terms, very simply, whilst the body is flesh, the current techniques are very accurate, and they obviously could be more accurate, but they have a lot of weight to them. Whereas if the body is skeletonized, it's either near or there. It's literally it's based on an opinion. You could bring in 3 experts, and they all could have 3 different opinions of how long the remains have been there for. It really depends, and that's the struggle.
So it's just the fact that after all of the flesh is gone and the skeleton is just skeletonized, the sort of accuracy just plummets.
Yeah. Well, because again, let's just say
Yeah, I guess how much does bone decay? Like, what's the time scale for your bones?
Now that again, that's a very interesting question, because again, that's to the point where people argue, when does it become archaeology, which is obviously the most frustrating question I've always get asked. That and the grave robber one, which I'll go into in a second. So basically, again, it depends on the microenvironment of the soil or the area it's deposited in. For example, if it's a very calcareous, calcium heavy, relatively alkaline soil, quite dry as well, not very moist, and the temperature's not too hot, it's relatively cold. The remains can be there for years. Like there's for example, it's why we find hominin remains that are hundreds of thousands of years old. Like there's this place called Olduvai Gorge in Africa, which has some of the oldest paleontological like remains, for example, and the preservation is absolutely amazing. But for example, this is a question that actually gets asked in a lot of paleontology and archaeology, let's just say. Well, not necessarily archaeology, but why is there lack of gorilla fossil records, for example? That's an interesting question, because a lot of the let's say older species hanged out or like lived in more tropical areas, and remains, even bony remains, decompose very easily over several years.
That makes a lot of sense. So what you're saying is there could be a lot of jungle dinosaurs we don't
But
know.
didn't they find the first Homo habilis remains in Indonesia, in Java, I think, which is like, isn't that a tropical environment? So was that a fluke, do you think, or?
Well, it's not. Again, that's the thing. That's why I studied the way I studied, because a lot of it doesn't actually make sense. Where it's like you can't really go. It's like, from a larger picture, you could just very simply tell the random person on the street, "Oh, yeah, by the way, if the ground's cold, dry, full of calcium, alkaline, sure, they'll preserve for whatever time. They'll preserve for a long time. It's okay."
That makes sense.
But then if you say, "Oh no, the ground's super acidic, super warm, super moist," it'll go in no time. But in actual fact, it's very complicated. Like, again, there's going to be examples like that where we look at them and we're like, this is amazing, how has this survived? Like, for example, you should look up these remains called Homo floresiensis. There's a big news story that came out about them when these remains came out, because they were essentially called the hobbit species, which is very interesting, because they were of a diminutive size, and they were found on the Flores Islands I can't remember exactly where, but it was Indonesia. It was that area. It was, again, what you could consider more of a tropical area on an island, but it was amazing that they survived so well. But they were found in a cave system, actually, which caves have different microenvironments, for example, where it's much cooler. It's not as harsh as the outside environment. Like, the biggest question to ask is, how well can they survive in a harsh environment? Which is what I always find fascinating about this area. It's very fun. It's like a puzzle you never solve, but you find just a bit more out, a bit more about.
That's all of science.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah. So
that sounds really interesting. Are you trying to look at the sort of proteins that are still on bones and like inside bones to see how much they're broken down yet?
there are certain, we can call them biomarkers. Just saying, biomarkers is just more as it's like a biological signature, a unique biological molecule, which is unique to the substance you're looking at. So basically, we're looking at bone, both inorganic and organic content. We're essentially trying to look at the proteins that are most commonly found in bone, most abundant, let's just say, and we're seeing, because they're the most reliable ones, because there's no point us looking at a protein that's just never there or will degrade quite easily. So the main aim is to find a protein that is reliable, that is a very abundant in bone, and we can try and identify. First, we need to identify that. First, to try and figure out, we can track it. So the main aim of it is to, let's just say, place some remains in the ground, take some samples, like sequentially across the timeline. Obviously, do multiple repeats and do multiple remains. You try and see if there's a pattern to come up with. And based on her previous research, this is a viable field to look into. Hence why I just really wanted to get involved, because
it's a power law. Everything is a power law.
Yeah. Exactly. So we're very much interested in, like, again, how proteins degrade, and see if there's seeing if we can use that really. Like, it's just to try and use as an extra tool. Because if we can do this, this can really improve criminal investigations in regard to that side of the area, which a lot of people say has not much hope, really.
So is it known that proteins degrade at a specific and measurable rate then?
In regards to the general context, yeah, because protein breakdown is something that's been investigated since we've understood what proteins are, really. But in regards to the application of forensic science, forensic proteomics, again, as I said before, is something that's only recently, let's just say, been researched, which is, I love this area because it's something that, like, you wonder why this hasn't been researched before, and you're like, it's not simple, but it's also not terribly complicated to at least come up with the ideal question, like, why can't we look at this before? It's quite amazing that we're only looking at this now. But again, I guess it's because we have now the technology to be able to look at all these things. So it might be to do with that.
How do you account for like differing levels of microorganisms or mycological life that might, break down?
That is something we're going to be looking at. I can't tell the answer, unfortunately, because again, it's a new field to me. But this is something I'm going to be learning. This is something I'm going to be hopefully investigating. We're not just investigating the proteins within the body. We're going to be investigating how they may react with the microenvironment in the remains where the remains are buried or left on, for example, and try again. The whole idea of taphonomy, forensic taphonomy, is to try and paint a picture from several things you're looking at. Like I can basically, before I started it, because I originally started my undergraduate research, I thought it was a fascinating topic. I was like, why aren't more people into this? And I really found out very quickly why no one gets into it, because there's so many areas you have to touch into. You have to, like, part of my MRes, I had to look at everything from and how let's just say how the geochemistry of the soil may affect the bones themselves. I even had to touch a little bit into the microclimate regime. Again, it's both brilliant but also scary in a sense, because I don't really. It's forensic taphonomy. If you go into it, unless you've done a very specific degree in it, a lot will come up that you've not been trained for. But you have to throw yourself in the deep end and just go over the research. It's brilliant, but also I found out very quickly why loads of people avoid it as a topic.
I suppose that's why these sort of like advancements take so long, right? Because like if we go back, I probably don't even know how long, but like I imagine if we go back like 80 years, police weren't they didn't have a forensic department, right? So they didn't have that sort of expertise. I'm not sure if that's actually true, but I imagine
when crime scene investigation more became a thing, it was more very early 1900s. Even so, when it came out, the trouble is there's still a bit of a stigma towards. I mean, not a stigma's the wrong word. There's still a bit of a lack of urgency with it, because it was, let's just say, it took a while for it to be incorporated. Let's just say, and like, for example, forensic research, I'm only going to say this from a point of view from England, because again, I've only done my research here. I'm not going to speak for any other nation or company or what say, but from the perspective of England, the government, let's just say, doesn't have a huge investment in furthering forensic research, because a lot of what they think, again, I'm not trying to speak on their behalf, but the impression I always get is that they think a lot of it's already been done, a lot of it's already, let's just say, useful enough. And as a result, it's very hard to come by research funding in my area, because it's not seen as important, which again is fair. Obviously, everyone's got their own priorities, but I believe there's a lot more that can be done with forensics. But obviously, I'm biased, clearly. But there's a lot of projects that a lot of other countries are doing that we're not, because we're quite restricted regarding funding. Like I talked about body farms earlier. Have you ever heard of a body farm?
Is that where you grow artificial organs?
You should
and things
explain.
like that? So.
Yeah, it's like. Don't worry, whenever we hear body farm, they sometimes believe like it's where you grow people. It's fine. Okay, body farm essentially is also known as like a HTC, a Human Taphonomy Centre. Essentially, is when you hear people donate the body to science. In England, when you donate your body to science, you actually donate it to medicine, and that basically means you donate it to anatomy labs as cadavers for anatomy research for people going through med school, let's say. Whereas in let's just say in the US, I believe Canada, Amsterdam in Netherlands, and Australia as well, South Australia, I believe, you can donate to a body farm. Now, body farm essentially is for taphonomists, people like me, to research how a body decomposes in a different microenvironment, in different contexts and scenarios, and try to apply that to real-world scenarios, everything from forensics to archaeology to paleontology, for example. And they are extremely useful, but obviously very controversial. And this is an example of my opinion of let's just say, the English government, like where we're missing out on this potential boatload of research. It's not like we can't get involved, it's just we can get involved in these external facilities. It's just much harder because obviously we're not there, for example. So, so basically there's quite a few limitations with regards to the world of forensics in England, let's just say, because either they think we don't need to do much more, or it's not really, let's just say, the big deal right now. Whereas I believe there's a lot more coming in.
do you think that certain media like CSI and shows like that might give people in positions of authority the impression that it's all done? Because in those shows they go, oh yeah, it's definitely died 3 weeks ago and it's killed that
Zoom
way.
in and hide.
Like,
Thing is, I'm like ashamed because I used to love like NCIS shows before it was like before sixth form, I guess, before I studied forensics. But the moment I got into my degree, or undergraduate degree, I realised how many, like, I hate to be one of those people that, like, you're in the subject area, you watch a TV show about it, and I hate to be one of those people who, you know, it's never fun to be with those people who nitpick it, and you're like, shut up, let me just have fun. However, there's a lot they get wrong, and they make it seem like everything's perfect and there's no, like, they really bring up contamination as an issue. It sounds really boring, but it's like one of the biggest issues we have in forensics. And the worst thing is you always see the CSIs come in all suave, the sunglasses, one glove, take it with little tweezers they put out of their pocket, contaminated, and just pick up like a hair and go, I know what's going to happen. Like, oh, look at that. It's just like, and like, yeah, you're right. They over exaggerate. I mean, it's great because obviously it was great when it first came out because it became super popular and a lot of people wanted to do it. There was a surge of students. Like we've had the entry rate for people wanting to do forensics and criminal investigation has been better than ever. I say, besides exclude 2020, of course. Like. But has been better than ever. But the worst thing is, these shows are super misleading because they make everyone think, like government officials, everyone really, think that they can figure out from everything, just one drop of blood can solve a crime scene. I mean, technically, I don't know. But yes, no, you're right. There's been definitely a big negative influence because of these fictional shows, which I believe if they did bring them more accuracy, it would be more beneficial. But again, there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do besides complain, really.
It does sound like, from what I'm hearing from you, it does sound actively bad for our general population, that because it kind of like paints a sort of picture for our like judicial system that things are like clear cut, whereas there is this sort of like statistical nature, and we aren't sure. The body was probably found in this period, but we don't entirely know.
And you go, if that's the jury's experience with forensics, then you do worry slightly.
It's just that's the thing also because you do. I've not been a expert witness myself, but a few of my colleagues have. If you work in the realm, or if you work as a forensic scientist, you will often be called up as an expert witness to a certain case, whether it's so many months after a case you've worked on, or maybe so many years. Because forensic scientists are the ones who work in the labs, not CSI. See, that's different. CSIs are the ones who work in the field crime scene. Again, some shows always get wrong as well. But so basically, for example, a main issue that can come up at being an expert witness from what I've gathered from my colleagues is you do get the jury who do get surprised by what gets brought up in the case, and because they're basing their knowledge off of, because obviously the whole point of the jury is you're trying to create the least amount of cognitive bias. But because of these shows, you do get a lot of people in the jury, let's say, from the public, who assume things are more ironclad, and therefore when they don't hear something ironclad in a court, they start thinking there's issues with the case, whereas no, that's actually just rule. Again, this is only something I've heard as a personal complaint, so don't take my word for it necessarily. Someone should really do an investigation or a study about this. Actually, this is a great study opportunity. There is definitely a negative impact of these shows to the general public, because the moment they start hearing about how a case really works, to us, what might seem like an excellent case, or might seem like excellent results, like, to them, they're like, oh, I saw in this show that something was way more ironclad, whereas to us, this is actually a really great result, but to them, it isn't, because they've just had the bias, and that makes things troublesome, because, it's based on, because obviously that's obviously how they contribute to the judicial system, so...
Because they potentially give the wrong verdict as a result, yeah.
There's whole arguments about it, like, is why shows, for example, like, I guess Bones came out, even though I do have a bone to pick with Bones, for example. The shows come out like that, they try and be accurate, because the producer on that is Kathy Ruggs, one of my favourite authors, actually. Fortunately, when you go from being an author, because she was a forensic anthropologist, go from an author to media, a lot gets changed to make things more interesting for the TV show, obviously. Again, this is not me slating the art, by the way, Henry.
No, it's fine. No.
I'm just making sure that if anyone, it's just.
I'm not slating the art, Henry, but you are actively a detriment to the sciences. So if you could just stop.
To be honest, most actors have quite a low opinion of the scripts that are done for serialized TV shows. So
yeah,
like,
I'm glad to hear that.
You just have to do it because you got to get paid.
Yeah.
So, Luke, your master's was on bone trauma, right?
Yes.
I remember. So for context, I used to live with Luke's brother Matt. So I've got a little hint of what you're doing. I remember at some point you made some sort of contraption to like swing into bones to mimic sort of wounds. But maybe you could describe A, what bone trauma is, B, what your master's was, and yeah, I'll get to
That's okay. That's very simply, bone trauma is trauma inflicted upon bone. It can be anything from blunt force trauma to sharp force, and that could be, and depending on what type of implement was used, determines whether it's blunt force or sharp force. Generally, again, put in layman's term, the easy way to describe it is blunt force trauma could be something like a hammer, where it creates more it depends on how the energy is spread, for example, and depends on the device used. Whereas sharp force trauma is always involves like a bladed edge of some kind. And I was very interested in sharp force trauma. I was very interested in how sharp force trauma on bone specifically changes in a short period of time, because there's practically almost no. I found out during my undergraduate degree. I started kind of semi-initially my undergraduate degree for my undergraduate project, where there's almost, besides a couple of papers, there's almost nothing on how, in the short term, how sharp force trauma, like again, let's just say from
an axe.
Axe, like hacking trauma from axes, knife attacks, defensive wounds, stuff like that. How they change short period of time, because there's a lot of archaeological investigations where they go, and it's quite simply they're like, oh, if it doesn't change over several hundred or thousand years, and we're finding archaeological remains with trauma, why would anyone investigate if they change short term for forensics? Which I thought was practically stupid, because I was like, well, sure, you can make that claim, but there's no evidence to support that. You can't just. You
should actually check, right?
Yeah, you can't know that they haven't changed.
Well, no, that's my undergraduate, because my undergraduate project morphed into my MRes, which is great, because I didn't have enough time from my undergraduate one for it. I mean, it was fine, but it morphed into it, which was great. And I essentially was interested. I was like, look, this is a win-win situation. Either we find out what everyone is saying, that, oh, it turns out they don't change much whatsoever, it's not significant, cool, it's great, because that means you can now actually back up that claim with some data, because there's not much experimental data about it. Or I find out something interesting and annoy a lot of people. The latter happened, hence why it developed into an MRes. Essentially, what I wanted to find out was, in a very short-term period, and by that I mean within months, does trauma on bone, specifically sharp force from, and I was very much interested in more or less hacking trauma, quite like in the context of dismemberment, let's just say again, because they are still, despite what TV shows say, dismemberment is still quite rare. You won't, it's not that common for you to find someone heavily chopped up, let's just say. But I just want to investigate in regards to these really serious wounds, if there are traces left, because this is something people don't think about. You do get people, again, even though it's a rare thing, you do get people who are skilled at it. You do people who might have had butchery experience or medical experience to the point where they might leave barely a trace. For example, I want to investigate, well, they do leave some form of a trace, only to the point where, like, so my background, no, my foundation for it was not just a whole segment chopped off, because obviously that's not going to change much, and that's the point everyone's looking at. I'm looking at what happens if someone was very careful disjointing the body, left some barely any indentations in the bone. I want to see how that would change short term, and if they might disappear, or if they might change to an extent it might hinder the identification. And I found some promising evidence that within up to 8 months of decomposition in relatively acidic, relatively destructive soil, again, nothing amazingly rare that you can't find. It was just farmland that was relatively silly, quite common. Where, like, that's a part of it. I also had to try and choose a realistic scenario. So I chose a field that anyone with reasonable intelligence could access and sneak onto. Obviously, I got permission for the project, but I had to think realistically. And, like,
I murdered a guy, made him in a field.
Well, no, with basically I was like, okay, so I need to think about it was realistic. I found a field of which, like, one of my friends owned, and it was something that you could reasonably access and you could reasonably dump a body, let's just say.
What did you use as a model for the human body? Did you use a pig or something like that?
Yes, because the UK is obviously finicky with these rules, as really my point earlier regarding the body farms, because we're not allowed to use human remains. I mean, what I was doing, even in the body farms, what I was doing was definitely wouldn't be considered respectful. I'd imagine a lot of families wouldn't be cool with it, which is fair. Like, where I had to use pig remains as a proxy, which pigs are... Again, some people argue, but for the UK, it's good enough. Like, it's a really good proxy. They decompose relatively similar to us, the way the bones and the way the flesh does as well. And they're for nutrient. Someone did like a nutrient analysis before, where they just identified how human flesh versus pig flesh made decomposed similarly, and the results are remarkably similar, which is great. So I used pig remains as a proxy, and I had several pig limbs, let's just say, which I got from a butcher, so which was very useful to use. And I was able to find out that within 8 months of burial, or 8 months of deposition, that some of the a notable portion of the cut marks changed to the point where you could misidentify them, be unsure what type of implement caused them, and some because I did make sure to leave some that were quite light, again, because that was the whole point, to hypothetically come out with like what happens if someone was very careful about it. So even some of the careful ones, they almost disappeared to the point where, like, unless you were looking for that, you wouldn't be able to find a trace. So that helped me build up my argument, which hopefully I'm going to publish this year or next year, depending on what happens. I'm able to at least come out with and say, I think there's reasonable evidence that we're missing here, or something that we really do need to look at or consider. Which, of course, has annoyed several people, because obviously there's a bunch of people who thought this is something that we don't need to consider. Whereas,
because it's a basic assumption in the field, yeah.
Yeah, I do like that's not important. Have you checked? No, it's not important. It's not important on the log. It can't be important, because that's also like sort of what my PhD is. It's not as extreme, but my PhD work will also be checking something that people sort of assume to be true, but I'm like, but nobody's checked, right? And my supervisor's like, no, nobody's checked. I'm like, so you're gonna check? You get to do all the hard work of actually check, because it's really difficult to check, and people are like, we don't want to do it. It's really tough. So.
Well, it is difficult, like, especially forensic autonomy itself. When you get into it, it's a difficult field because you have to incorporate a bunch of subfields. It's a multidisciplinary topic. So me doing this as well, there wasn't a lot to go on previously to make, like, again, a lot of, let's just say, points I had to make for my research. I had to be not circumstantial, but I had to be open about it. I had to be very careful not to say, because I can't be like, I'm the only one who's found this out, so this must be true. No, I still have to be open that this is. I've hopefully opened the door for myself and other people to investigate further, which again, obviously, is creating more research, which is great, but also at the same time, you get a lot of people who are very annoyed. Like I'm not going to name names, obviously, but
there's definitely the politics of publications.
Yeah.
There, where I assume you would also, if you publish, you go through a referee who, in your field, is probably one of your competitors that questions all your steps. You have to justify it. So
there's the notion of preeminence as well. So if somebody's already preeminent and is posing the opposite point, then you're going to have a difficult time.
Well, that's the thing. Again, as a researcher, you have to look forward to that, because there's always, you have to be up for defending your research. Like it's just something that always has to be accounted. And once you get settled on the idea that your research is always going to be challenged, you kind of get over it. I mean, obviously it's still going to be difficult, but the one thing I think, again, Sid and anyone else again who's doing research as well, I'm sure you can agree. Once you get over the aspect that you're going to be challenged constantly, it kind of shapes your experience a bit more, in my opinion. Whereas I definitely had some people, not going to name names, anyone from my department, but I definitely had one or two people who looked at, when I started my MRes, my masters, they definitely looked at what I was doing and was like, yep, not going to work out. You're not going to find anything. I'm just like, yep, good to know. Cool, thanks for your support. Good to know.
But if you find nothing, that's still a result, because you go...
I saw it as a win-win.
I also get to do something similar where either I confirm what the field believes, where, it's not actually that important, which is good, because it means, hey, I've checked, and I will actually have done some serious chemistry to, back it up.
Ooh, chemistry.
Or, guys, bad news. Everything you've done in the past 20 years is very slightly wrong.
Well, that's the thing. It's not for me. I'm not like more or less saying that anything's wrong. I'm just more pointing out something that could have been. I'm making more work for people as well. Because obviously, again, forensic investigators, when they do find trauma, they do something called trauma analysis, where you can do really cool stuff, where they do 3D reconstructions to try and determine what was the implement, what was the tool used. Because obviously, if you find out what the murder weapon was, or if it was done post-mortem, if it was done after death, again, like a lot of dismemberment is. It can really help the investigation. Whereas what I'm suggesting is, but you could have also done a little background into where the person was buried or deposited, or where the body was found, and then you could try and help. It could help you figure out maybe how long they were there for as well. And also, you might be mistaken something that looks like trauma from axe, but it might be trauma from a cleaver, but it's just widened and become more deteriorated to the point where they believe it's the. There's been several papers where people have been like, oh yeah, creating an average of the width of several types of axes, let's just say, and they looked at thousands of tools and they say if it's between this range and this width, it's going to be this tool. And obviously when it came out, that's amazing. But what I'm suggesting is, yeah, that's great if you've already found the body. What happens if the body's been skeletonized, has been there for a while? No one's talking about that. What happens if the trauma has decomposed?
Instead of like a very fine blade, it could have been like a blunt axe, but you can't see it.
Yeah, there's so much changes that could have happened depending on the microenvironment. And the thing is, whenever I brought up, the general consensus was, that doesn't really happen that much. I'm like, yeah, but still, we got to talk about it.
But it does, right?
Like, it happens. It's like if it didn't happen that much, I wouldn't be bringing it up. Like, so yeah, that essentially was my MRIS research.
I suppose the reason this upsets so many people is because you look at the consequences of this and you just go, a lot of forensic analysis could have been, wrong.
Either wrong, like especially with cold cases as well. Because things I never like to say people were wrong. I just always say maybe you could have been more informed. Maybe people could have been more informed, or they could have found out a bit more if they did this. Also, it's adding extra steps. In regards to forensics, no one likes extra steps because that's also the reason why a lot of forensics doesn't get researched much, because either the government or I don't know whoever's investigating might be. It's more work, if that makes sense. Because again, it's not necessarily you're not necessarily doing it in the pursuit of pure research, where let's just say you don't have much of a time limit. You're doing it. Criminal investigations is time sensitive, so you don't really want to give them a technique that's just going to waste people's time. So the moment you start bringing up issues like that, it causes like so many interpolitical issues. So basically, by me choosing that subject area, I knew I was going to get a lot of like challenges from people saying, like, why are you doing this? If you do find out more information, how is it going to be useful? And I was kind of always going with the mindset that, very simple step, I just want to find out if we can find out more. That's it. And like, whatever people want to do with it, they do with it.
Well, I think it's galling in any field when you discover that there's a basic assumption that's never been tested.
Yeah. But no, I hope to carry on more of that outside of the PhD, because obviously PhD I'm looking at more of the molecular scale, which is both scary and interesting, because obviously I've only worked at a more macro look at trauma, let's just say, but I'm actually looking at like molecular side of things, which is fascinating because I essentially get to do relatively the same thing where I'm looking at something that's not really been done before much and seeing if it can contribute towards determine how long the body's been there for. We can find out more about the environment and whatnot. So essentially it's doing the same thing. Instead of trauma, I'm looking at biomolecules, which is great. But so the trauma side of things, I'm definitely doing that more outside of the PhD. How I'm going to do it, don't know, but I won't sleep. I don't know. I definitely need to carry it on. I definitely need to make sure this doesn't get left alone, especially because there's only me and a few other people interested in it so far.
I do really like this sort of like can-do attitude about you, Luke, and
Thank you.
I don't think you've ever said, I don't know how to do this, or this isn't me, or this isn't my job. You always have this sort of attitude of, I'm just going to go away, I'm going to try and pick it up and do my absolute best, right? So I think this sort of like new, fresh study, if there's anyone to sort of jump into that new field, it's going to be you.
Thank you. It's literally it's both scary because at the same time it's like, because obviously it depends on your field. Because obviously my original discipline is archaeology and forensic sciences, but again I've had to bring in stuff that's not my field. Like part of my current research assistant project right now, where I'm because again I'm also like obviously doing a lot of reading, literature reviews and whatnot. I'm doing different writing about how we determine drugs in the air and whatnot. I've had to quickly learn about not climate physics, but I've had to quickly learn about like meteoclimate regimes or like atmospheric chemistry slightly, because that's what I love about what I do is whenever I have to try and go to new topics like that, there's always a wall, or there's always something I go, right, never done this topic before. Let's get a mountain of reading done. Let's try and crack the pieces I need. And the thing is, that's also why the field I do is also relatively controversial, because you get a lot of people saying, well, if you're not an expert in that whole field, how can your research be viable? It's like, yeah, but no offense, in regards to what I do, it's multidisciplinary. There's no way you can get someone who's an expert in this.
Luke, just to wrap things up now, you're in a very unique subfield. And you've got a pretty, winding path to get there as well. You've done all sorts of different projects. I feel like this field is actually going to be fairly more popular in the coming years, and, hopefully rises in its popularity even further. If someone were to proverbially follow in your footsteps. What sort of advice would you give them if they want to, let's say they want to do what you're doing, like this field, they find forensic taphonomy really cool?
Okay, honestly, I have to say, be open to jumping in the deep end, because you're gonna feel like that. And I obviously know that's a lot that happens with a lot of fields, but especially with this one, because you're gonna encounter a lot of different areas which you've never heard of before. And honestly, I know this is a very generic advice where people give, like, don't be afraid to ask for help. But honestly, first thing you do, ask for help. Collaborate, like, ask for help. Try and get as many people different opinions about it, because it is really going to help you. Like, the first thing I found, because I really obviously struggled with it definitely initially in my field, because I didn't know what direction, what the hell did I go to. Even with people, even my seniors in, let's just say, in forensic anthropology, who knew obviously their field, but they're like, oh yeah, but you're talking about aspect I don't know. And you have to be really, obviously people might have confidence issues, but you really have to be up for asking for help and asking people to try and get them involved. Try and get them involved is really, because it helps them, because it gives them further experience. It helps spread the word a bit about how we can be useful to them and how people can be useful to us. Like, forensic taphonomists not only need help from other people, we can be useful to other people as well. Like, we are slowly spreading to other subfields where we can be more helpful towards. So yeah, I say the number one thing if you want to follow in the similar footsteps is, don't be afraid of researching in fields that you've never thought about or never touched. Like, again, I didn't think a year ago I'd be looking into a little bit of like climate physical or atmospheric chemistry, like touching into it, like, but jump into it and definitely ask for help. Like, there's no reason to be afraid to ask for help regarding it. You really, like, it'll really be your biggest weapon. I don't even know if you want to say that, but your biggest weapon, your biggest device, like, is not manipulating, not exploiting, but using others. Using others in the positive sense. Yeah,
but it's a give and take relationship,
Yeah,
right?
100%.
People aren't going to help you. You have to show them that, you have something to offer as well.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think in your case, that's pretty, well, to us it's been obvious because we've been talking to you for 2
Yes.
hours. But I really think that it's important to enlighten the general public and other people who are in the sorts of forensics fields that, hey, this is an important thing that we need to research as well.
Yeah, be public about it. Be very open about it. Because again, I know several forensic taphonomists. I've met several.
Like, go on a podcast.
Yeah. I've met various taphonomists of which I knew about them through their work, but I was like, but in regards to public awareness, I didn't really know about, and like, it's because it's not a huge problem. It's like people need to speak up more about it.
I'll be
especially
honest,
in our field,
I'd
so-
never heard of your specific field before we were going to do this
that's
podcast.
That's the point.
Yeah,
That's the point. Like, it's not especially a difficult one to comprehend, really, as well. Like, it's something that needs to be enlightened more outside of the media. So I say, if you're going to go into forensic taphonomy or taphonomy anyway, the two things I say is definitely ask for help and be a voice to the public. Like, those are the two things that will, one, help our field and also help yourself, really. Because again, you might get some people who've never really heard of the subject before. Someone who's, like, again, analytical chemist, or someone who works purely in the biological sciences, and they go, wow, I never knew you were doing this. Can I help? Can I contribute in a way? Because again, you might get someone who's just interested, might want to just lend a hand. Like, that's happened to me literally before in a conference before, where they heard about what I was doing. They say, oh, do you want to come over to my department, and do you want to conduct some of your research there? It'll look good for us, and it'll be good for you.
Love it, yeah.
A very light note, just to finish it off. Sharp force trauma must be brilliant at dinner parties, because, if somebody brings out, some sort of steak or something, well, that's been cut with that kind of knife.
I love it. Great conversation starter. So, Luke, do you want to? First of all, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's been great talking to you. Do you want to plug your social media and where people can find you? If you've got a website, I don't know.
Yeah, I've got I should use my Twitter more, but I've got Twitter, gent4amph. It's where I try to update notes about my work and things in my field. I should really use it more. But yeah, please follow me on there if you want to.
Gent for what?
Gent4amph, and 4 as an FOR. So yeah, so just follow me on Twitter now. I'll try.
We'll put it in the description.
Yeah, I'll try and hopefully try and help spread the word of people in my field and fellow colleagues as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Luke.
Thank you.
All right, perfect. Thanks very much. All right, guys. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next week.